A woman who claims to be Madeleine McCann has just been arrested in the United Kingdom. But are we witnessing a bombshell revelation or the greatest hoax of recent times? The truth behind this case will surprise you. Imagine opening your phone and being greeted by the following headline: Woman who claimed to be Madeleine McCann is arrested in the United Kingdom. Your heart starts racing. What do you mean? Madeleine McCann, that case that shocked the world? The little girl who went missing in 2007 during her family's vacation in Portugal? But before you can process the information, the news continues. The arrested woman is Julia Wandolt, the young Polish woman who went viral on the internet by insisting that she was, in fact, the missing girl. You remember her. The face splashed in newspapers, the emotional videos, the desperate pleas for a DNA test. At first, everything seemed very doubtful. What if she were telling the truth? Then came the shock. The DNA proved she was not Madeleine. The mystery should have ended there, right? But that's not what happened. Julia refused to accept the truth. She ignored the evidence. She kept insisting that something was wrong. She claimed that her story had not been fully revealed. And now, she's behind bars. But why? What drove Julia to go so far as to get arrested? Had she simply fallen into her own illusion? Or was there something more behind it all? A premeditated lie? Someone pulling the strings behind the scenes? And what if I told you that Julia's obsession didn't stop at the viral videos, that she went further than anyone imagined and got dangerously close to the McCann family? Something much darker happened. And when you learn the details, you might realize that this case goes far beyond what we imagine. Most people believe that after the DNA test, Julia would simply vanish from the spotlight, that she would accept the result, move on, and leave the story behind. But it was the opposite. Julia didn't give up. On the contrary, she intensified her search, and she did something no one expected. She began stalking the McCann family. Have you ever heard of stalking? It is an obsessive behavior when someone starts to follow, monitor, and harass another person persistently. And that's exactly what began to happen. Sources close to the family reveal that Julia tried to contact Kate and Jerry McCann directly, not just through messages. She even created fake profiles to talk to them and to Madeleine's siblings. And she didn't stop there. She traveled to the United Kingdom and began frequenting places connected to the family, places where the McCanns were known to be. She asked about them. She tried to get information. She wanted to meet them face to face. But why? What did she expect to achieve? And if she truly believed she was Madeleine, would that justify her actions? The most frightening part is that Julia wasn't alone. At the time of her arrest, another person was with her, and this 60-year-old woman might have an even more disturbing role in this story. Stories like this aren't as uncommon as they might seem. The case of Julia Wandolt raises a much larger question. How far can a person go when they are convinced of something that isn't real? Today's internet can transform any theory into absolute truth. It doesn't matter what the facts say. When someone deeply believes in a narrative, they can reach the point of ignoring any contrary evidence. And when that belief mixes with a case as emotionally charged as Madeleine McCann's, the result can be devastating. Julia wasn't the first person to claim to be the missing girl. Others have done it before, but she was the only one to take this obsession to the extreme. What makes someone defy concrete evidence, even when everything indicates they are wrong? What motivates a person to put themselves at risk for something that makes no sense to others? Was Julia merely a manipulator seeking fame? Or was she a victim of something larger? A psychological disorder that made her believe her own lie. And now behind bars, what will happen to her? If this case teaches us anything, it is that the line between conviction and obsession can be much thinner than we imagine. But before drawing any conclusions, I need to tell you something even more chilling. It was night when Julia was detained. Bristol Airport was busy. Passengers hurried by, barely noticing the tension in the air. Two plainclothes officers approached her. The approach was discreet yet firm. Julia looked around trying to understand. She knew they were there for her. When she was informed that she was under arrest, she did not react like someone who had committed a crime. She smiled. Why? What was going through her mind at that moment? Relief? Or did she still believe she was about to prove something? After all, for Julia, this story wasn't over yet. Now that Julia is behind bars, the big question remains unanswered. Or was it all just a calculated hoax? And what about the 60-year-old woman who was with her? The truth is even more disturbing. And what if I told you that this arrest might have been only the beginning of something much bigger? Before we continue, if you enjoy deep investigations and want to follow the hidden secrets behind the world's most famous criminal mysteries, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Here we analyze what no one else does. Now, let's uncover what really happened on the night Julia Wandelt was arrested. Bristol Airport was busy that night. Passengers hurried by, dragging suitcases, looking at their phones, checking the departure boards. No one seemed to notice the woman sitting on one of the benches near the arrival gate. Julia Wandelt kept her head down, her eyes fixed on her phone screen. Her hands trembled slightly as she swiped. She was waiting for something that, in her mind, was about to happen. Beside her, an older woman, around 60 years old, muttered something quietly as if trying to calm Julia. But the young woman's eyes remained glued to her phone. She had a mission. According to sources close to the investigation, Julia believed she was on the verge of a definitive revelation. She no longer talked about the DNA. To her, the test proved nothing. She was absolutely convinced that someone was hiding the truth, and that truth, in her mind, was right before her eyes. Apparently, Julia had received an anonymous tip days before her arrest, a hint that there was something in England that could prove her theory, something directly linked to the McCann family. What exactly was this information? We still don't know, but we do know what Julia did. She tried to contact the McCanns directly. She sent messages, emails, tried to get their attention in any way possible, but she got no response. So she made the decision that would change everything. She traveled to the United Kingdom and went to Bristol, where the family was supposedly located. And it was there, at that airport, that everything unraveled. Two plainclothes police officers had been observing Julia for some time. They didn't approach immediately. They wanted to be sure she really posed a threat before intervening. The problem was that Julia seemed increasingly agitated. She kept looking around repeatedly, as if searching for someone. With every notification on her phone, her expression shifted, from anxiety to frustration, then back to hope. Then she suddenly stood up. Witnesses say that Julia started walking toward a side exit of the airport, muttering something to the woman with her. Her gaze was fixed on something, or someone. The officers didn't wait any longer. They quickly approached and ordered her to stop. Julia hesitated for a second, then smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone who had been caught. It was the smile of someone who believed they had won. The arrest was discreet, without any fanfare. Julia did not resist. She only murmured in a low voice, "I knew this was going to happen." The older woman who was with her was also taken in for questioning, but was released shortly after. To this day, it remains unclear what her exact role was in this story. Julia, on the other hand, was officially detained on charges of stalking and harassment. And the question that still lingers is, what exactly did she think she would find that night? And in her mind, had this story already ended, or was it just beginning? At the police station, Julia sat in a cold room, illuminated only by the harsh white light from the ceiling. Her hands were cuffed on the table, but she didn't seem bothered by it. What was striking was her fixed gaze, full of conviction. She didn't appear worried, frightened, or remorseful. She seemed calm. When one of the investigators entered the room with a notepad and a glass of water, they know I'm Julia to the truth, doesn't it? The officer ignored her for a moment, flipping through the papers in front of him. But Julia didn't wait for a response. She continued talking as if she were just voicing the thoughts swirling in her mind. "They want to silence me, but I know what they did." Her tone was too calm, almost rehearsed, yet there was something peculiar. She spoke vaguely, without specifying who they were or what exactly they had done. By that time, investigators had gathered plenty of evidence against Julia. The messages sent to the McCann family, the repeated attempts to contact Kate and Jerry, the fake profiles created to reach Madeleine's siblings. It was all enough to constitute stalking. But what worried the authorities wasn't just the virtual harassment. It was the fact that Julia truly believed she was on the verge of making an important discovery. And what if she didn't stop there? What was stopping her from taking an even more extreme step? From breaking into a property, attempting direct contact, or doing something irreversible? At that moment, Julia wasn't just a woman obsessed with a famous case. She was a potential threat. While Julia remained in custody, investigators tried to understand one unresolved question. What exactly was she looking for? According to sources close to the case, in the days leading up to her arrest, Julia received anonymous messages from an alleged informant, someone who claimed to have proof that the DNA test had been manipulated, that the McCanns knew something that couldn't be revealed. Julia believed it immediately. And the scariest part? The messages seemed to come from different senders, yet the writing style suggested they could have been sent by the same person. Who was behind this? Was it someone deliberately fueling Julia's obsession? Or had she created these messages herself, reinforcing her own delusion? The 60-year-old woman who was arrested with her might have some answers, but her identity was not disclosed by the authorities. The only confirmed information is that she was fully aware of Julia's obsession and that in some way, she was encouraging this journey. This raises an even more serious question. Was Julia really alone in this? What seemed like just a story of an obsessed woman might actually be the beginning of something much larger. After all, if someone was encouraging Julia to continue with this stalking, what was the true objective behind it? And more importantly, would Julia stop even while imprisoned? Or is this obsession far from over? Julia Wandelt sat in the interrogation room, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. Since her arrest, she maintained the same stance. She didn't see herself as guilty. To her, it was all a conspiracy to prevent her from uncovering the truth. Investigators pressed her for hours trying to understand her true motives. What drove her to cross the ocean to stalk a family that had already suffered so much? What did she hope to find? "You don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "I'm not a criminal. I'm trying to find out who I really am." But that explanation was no longer enough. The evidence was clear. Julia sent multiple persistent messages to the McCanns, created fake profiles, tried to get close to Madeleine's siblings, and ultimately traveled to the United Kingdom with an unknown purpose. For the police, this was no longer a simple search for identity. It was a serious case of stalking. The remaining question was, did Julia do this for fame, or did she truly believe her own story? Some experts who analyzed the case suggested that Julia might be suffering from a psychological disorder, such as an identity delusion. This would explain why she clung to the idea of being Madeleine, even when the evidence showed otherwise. The internet may have amplified this illusion, making her feel that her theory was valid. On the other hand, there was also another possibility. Julia knew she wasn't Madeleine, but refused to admit it in order not to lose the attention she had gained. She had already amassed millions of followers, received support from influencers, and been interviewed by international media. Backing down would mean the end of her instant fame. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. This obsession had real consequences. And not only for Julia. The McCann family had lived for years with the weight of Madeleine's disappearance. But Julia's case reawakened a trauma that had never been overcome. Imagine spending over a decade searching for answers, dealing with conspiracy theories, being attacked on the internet, and suddenly someone appears claiming to be your missing daughter. At first, it might seem like a new ray of hope, but when that person refuses DNA tests and starts stalking you, the situation becomes unbearable. Sources close to the family said that Kate and Jerry McCann were deeply shaken by Julia, but also by the real danger this situation represented. And the most concerning part? Julia wasn't the first and probably won't be the last. In recent years, several people have already claimed to be Madeleine McCann. Some clearly sought attention. Others perhaps truly believed in their own delusion. But with social media, these cases are becoming more and more common. This raises a bigger question. To what extent can the internet feed delusions and create new dangerous obsessions? Julia Wandelt became an extreme example of how a repeated lie can eventually transform into truth in someone's mind. When millions of people began commenting on and supporting her theory, it stopped being just a suspicion. It became a conviction. The case also served as a warning about the dangers of stalking. Many people think that online harassment has no consequences, but the truth is that it can destroy real lives. The stalking doesn't need to be physical to be devastating. Now Julia is behind bars, but in her mind, is this story over? Or is it just a pause before her next attempt? And more importantly, who will be the next victim of an obsession that began on the internet and spilled into the real world? The story of Julia Wandelt isn't just about a woman who claimed to be Madeleine McCann. It reveals something much deeper. How much the truth can be distorted when we find an audience willing to believe. In the end, was Julia a victim or a manipulator? Perhaps a bit of both. Maybe it started as a genuine doubt about her identity, something anyone might feel at some point in life. But at some point, that doubt turned into an obsession. And when the internet provided a stage for this story, it became something even bigger. This makes you wonder how many other people have been led to believe in something that wasn't real simply because they found a group reinforcing that idea. The internet has that power. It can amplify truths, but it can also spread lies and nurture illusions. And as we've seen in Julia's case, those illusions don't stay confined to the virtual world. They cross the screen, affect real people, and create real victims. And perhaps that is the real question here. What happens when we can no longer distinguish between what is true and what is just a story we like to believe? Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think Julia really believed she was Madeleine McCann? Or was it all just a grand manipulation? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I really want to know what you think. If this story left you intrigued, there's a book I need to recommend. It talks exactly about how certain obsessions can grow to the point of becoming dangerous and how social media can influence criminal investigations. It's one of those books that makes you question what we really know about the world's most famous cases. I left the link in the first pinned comment. Check it out, because after all, the truth always demands a price. Now, if you've stayed with me this far, I have a challenge for you. Comment "I see beyond the headlines," so I know you followed the story to the end. And if you like this type of in-depth investigation, there's a video you need to watch next. In it, we talk about another case where the evidence was ignored, and perhaps the truth was never told. Click now to watch.